Brett.
Well, happy Wednesday. Bishop on Air. Special broadcast for you this morning. Doing a live-to-tape documentary on the one-year anniversary of the state's gun and magazine ban. Lot to tackle, so I appreciate you guys tuning in, and hopefully this is informative. And this really is just a rough draft of sorts of looking past the back, 12 months ago and where we've come. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Obviously, we've been tracking this since before the law was signed into law on January 10th of 2023. All of the court battles that have happened, all of the arguments that have been made, and where we're at right now. So let's go ahead and get on into it. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your friends, follow us on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Hit that like and notification button, and let's delve right on into it. 1 year ago today, the Protect Illinois Communities Act signed into law.
We are not taking away anyone's guns, but we will require that the serial numbers on these grandfathered weapons be associated with the owner's FOID account.
Why have a registry of firearms? Yeah, I'm not sure I understand, because what you want to do is prevent people from purchasing assault weapons in the state, and you want to make sure that you know where those very, very deadly weapons are, who owns them, when and if a crime is committed with one of them.
But you are turning legal gun owners with this bill into felons.
So I don't know how you're going to enforce this. You can't put us all in jail. Your new bail law just said you can't do that.
We feel this law that has recently passed is unconstitutional, and how we do not want to, or how we are not going to enforce any of that law.
Well, you don't get to choose which laws you comply with in the state of Illinois. Let's be clear.
Our founding fathers' original intent, they guaranteed, they assured, they understood what inalienable rights are. And those are rights that are given to we the people, individuals, by God. And actually, it is up to the government to protect those rights.
1 year ago today, the state of Illinois enacted a gun and magazine ban, January 10th, 2023. Since then, there have been a slew of lawsuits, and compliance rates are low by all standards. Welcome in, Bishop on Air, a live-to-tape documentary special here with Bishop on Air as we look past the past year and how this law was ultimately put together. So I appreciate you guys taking part and being here for this. But let's get right on into it. There's tons to tackle. Of course, we've got the law that was enacted, but there was some predicate of why some who supported a gun and magazine ban wanted this law, and a lot of it deals with what happened on July 4th of 2022 in Highland Park, where you had a gunman shoot and kill multiple people, injuring dozens, using a semi-automatic rifle. And while that case continues on in the prosecution against the accused, Robert Cremo III, you've got those who used that as the why of passing a gun and magazine ban. But some of the things about that particular case need to be highlighted as well when it comes to the July 4th shooting, because of the clear and present danger reports that local law enforcement gave to Illinois State Police before the suspect actually got a firearm owner ID card after his father signed off on it. But he had that clear and present danger report. Well, Illinois State Police were asked about that clear and present danger reports, and here's Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly. I believe this is back in December of 2022 when they were discussing these things.
And if you look at the report that was understandably submitted by the Highland Park Police Department in response to the information that they had, and then you look at the law that with regards to clear and present danger, what the statute requires, what is that threshold? That did not meet that threshold. That's the consensus from old analysts and new analysts alike. We vetted it multiple times. Would that have met the threshold? And the consensus is no. After that point, there being no new developments, no additional arrest, no additional criminal record, no new mental health prohibitor, nothing that indicated that the individual had been checked into a mental health facility that requires a new report. No basis for a firearms restraining order had been filed, or an order of protection. All the things that are under the law that would be able to help us stop from issuing a firearms identification card. None of those factors were present at the time.
And state police said that they then changed their rules to allow for consideration of such clear and present danger reports. Back then, I asked Illinois State Rifle Association's Richard Pearson about this.
Well, what it shows is that somehow those records have to be kept, even though a person does not have a FOID card, and applied to their application for a FOID card if they make one. So, I mean, there's all along the line we find things that fail in the system, and all these failures wind up being a disaster,
And ultimately, that individual getting a firearm owner identification card and allegedly conducting those heinous acts against innocent people. But it still led to legislators crafting a bill to ban certain semi-automatic firearms. And during committee hearings in December of 2022, you had proponents and opponents sound off on how they feel this law may impact their communities.
And if this ban was to take effect, still we got hearts that need to be changed, minds that need to be changed, so the finger will pull the trigger. Because if all guns were non-existent and the heart and the mind is not changed, something's wrong mentally, they're going to what? They're going to go with bats. They're going to go with knives. Anything that they can pick up, screwdrivers, what they do in the penitentiary, So I'm talking about a heart and a mind change and resources brought to a community brought together with those resources so we can heal the minds and hearts of our people to bring a better community worldwide, not just Chicago, worldwide.
Don't turn a deaf ear. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but to the others who don't support this, don't look away. Don't turn a deaf ear. We have to do something. We don't have to live like this, and we have to make changes. And I very much support the ban on assault weapons and the large capacity magazines.
You have a highway named after a great journalist, one who wanted women's rights, advocate for truth, anti-lynching. She had this to say: a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every Black home and should be used for that protection, which the law refuses to give. Ida B. Wells. If you had to make it more modern, an AR-15, a shotgun, AK, doesn't matter. That is legally bought, that is legally owned. Should have the place for honor in every Black, gay, bi, Arab, Jew, doesn't matter.
So
should be
again,
used in protection.
You've got the ongoing debate there before the law ultimately passed, and even more back and forth during another committee, because they had several committees in December of 2022 talking about the ban on certain semi-automatic firearms. And Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly was available then as well to answer questions about how they're going to get compliance of the law, not just of the prohibition of the sale of such items, but also the registry of such items, because the law that passed January 10th and was enacted in 2023, it included a registry starting October 1st with the deadline of January 1st this year, just last week, and how that compliance is going to be brought about. Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly had some reaction to that.
Yeah, my feeling is the Illinois State Police, you give us enough resources, we can put a man on the moon if that's what the General Assembly wants us to do. Looking at the mission that is outlined here within this bill, we believe we can accomplish that, and we'll be able to answer ready so long as we have that support and those resources.
I presume there's hundreds of thousands of these listed firearms legally owned today, and if this passes, they won't be. How are you going to enforce compliance?
And that will be part of our normal enforcement efforts. When we find something that is not in compliance with the law, either because it's a prohibitor or it's a ghost gun or it's a switch or whatever the case may be that makes it unlawful, that will just be one of the categories that our folks will be enforcing as they come across these firearms. But in terms of the individuals who that will be allowed to retain them and they'll be allowed to keep them, that's what some of those additional resources we'll need for the unsworn personnel to set up essentially kiosks to make it convenient for folks to be able to do the process that's outlined in this legislation, so they can keep those. The information is on file with the Illinois State Police pursuant to this statute. That'll be less of an enforcement mechanism and more of a compliance mechanism.
Bottom line is this bill keeps alive systemic racism as it applies to the Second Amendment. I can take my firearms, my mags, I can go across the border. I have the means. What about the people that don't? What about the people you're just going to criminalize them? There's over 70 counties in Illinois that are 2A sanctuary counties. Those folks aren't going to get arrested. So
I don't know how you're going to enforce this. You can't put us all in jail. Your new bail law just said you can't do that. You will have civil disobedience to where people aren't going to register things. They're not going to surrender things. They're not going to turn them in. So I ask you, what is the enforcement mechanism? Are you going to send the state police house to house? Because as one local law enforcement chief put it in my area, he said, Todd, you're telling me that I have to go potentially arrest my neighbors, people I go to church with, the people on my son's football squad, the people that come over and barbecue, the guys I see in the bar, they're all now felons?
So the argument's pretty strong, as you heard from Ed Sullivan and Todd Vandermeide in response to some of the questions and concerns during committee hearings in 2022. Then you get to actual action of getting the law set up before it passed. And in committee, you had House Speaker Chris Welch talk about the concerns people have and what the law ultimately is going to lead to. And here's Chris Welch during committee.
If this bill were to become law, there will be no removal of these weapons from people who already own them. And I really want to highlight that, because we always hear this narrative that we're taking away guns from lawful gun owners.
And you had stakeholders talking about what they're ultimately doing. Here's Chris Welch, some more.
We are not taking away anyone's guns, but we will require that the serial numbers on these grandfathered weapons be associated with the owner's FOID account. There must be accountability.
Other stakeholders sharing their thoughts and concerns.
We want to make it more expensive. We want to make it more trying, and we want to restrict the black community from their rights. It is their right. It's their Second Amendment right. We have to fight for that right? Because we were considered 3/5 of a man. I would no longer be considered 3/5 of a man. Don't take my rights.
It was Courtney Redman, and he's a Second Amendment advocate, but you also had Republican lawmakers share their concerns. Here's C.D. Davidsmeyer.
Are we pushing people away from the current legal system? Because if I'm going to be illegal, and a felony is worse than not having a FOID card, right? Class 4, Class 3, Class 2 felony is worse than the punishment for not having a FOID card. my concern is that we're pushing people away from supporting the current legal system that is currently in place.
And Davidsmeyer said that it's ultimately going to turn a lot of people into felons. He had concerns about. But then it got onto the House and Senate floor where you had people making the case for the ban, but also others saying that they are not going to comply with the ban. In the House, Andrew Chesney shared some of the thoughts about whether or not this law is going to make the state safer.
And I do agree, Speaker and Governor, I do agree that our area, our state, has crime problems. But I can't help to note the area that the crime problems predominantly resonate are in the areas you represent. Why? We want to lock them up. You want to cut them loose. It's that simple. All of our neighbors disagree with every one of you on the other side of the aisle on gun regulation, or as I would say, gun confiscation. Every state. And yet you sit here at 1 a.m. and talk to us about safety. And all we're asking for is to lock up the bad and empower and embrace the good. That's all we've asked, Governor. That's all we've asked, Mr. Speaker.
Representative, your time has expired.
And after rushing this through both chambers in the House, it ultimately did pass.
Senate Bill 2226, having received the constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.
And this is even with all of the legal options that people had to sue the state over this, but also questioning the process of the bill coming together. I think they had to gut and replace a bill about insurance regulation and then replace it with a measure to ban the sale of certain types of firearms. Well, shortly after the law passed on January 10th, a year ago today, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed that measure. And afterwards, the governor took questions and talked about compliance and how you had sheriffs across the state and state's attorneys across the state say that they were not going to enforce this law.
Well, you don't get to choose which laws you comply with in the state of Illinois. Let's be clear. The fact is that, yes, there are, of course, people who are trying to politically grandstand, who want to make a name for themselves by claiming that they will not comply. But the reality is that the state police is responsible for enforcement, as are all law enforcement all across this state. And they will, in fact, do their job, or they won't be in their job.
So the governor also asked about the pending legal challenges that were expected.
NRA and the other groups that were opposed to this, that they're going to try to take this to court. So, my reaction, of course, is this is a constitutional bill. The law here that we now have enacted is constitutional. There was a lot of thought that went into it to make sure that it would be. And obviously, things will go through the courts and they'll make their determinations, but I feel very confident.
So we're doing a live-to-tape documentary here, a rough draft of sorts, because I'm surely going to have to put together a completed version that's more produced than just lining up these clips and airing them for you here live on this one-year anniversary of the Protect Illinois Communities Act being put into place. It's Bishop on Air. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you guys being here. Continuing on, the volley back and forth about enforcement and whether sheriffs are going to actually enforce this measure. You had sheriffs hold a news conference, including those from Crawford County and Jasper County and others. Crawford County Sheriff William Rutan had this to say when he held that news conference with other sheriffs from across the state about enforcing this measure.
I am a constitutional officer. I swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States first and foremost, and that me and several of the other sheriffs in the state, like most of us, several state's attorneys, along with the Crawford County State's Attorney, have sent out these letters stating that we feel this law that has recently passed is unconstitutional, and how we do not want to, or how we are not going to enforce any of that law.
And the governor reacting to some of that as more sheriffs came out saying that they're not going to enforce this law.
Well, let's be clear. They took an oath of office to enforce the laws of the state of Illinois, and they will do so. At this point, as you know, people need to register their existing weapons. We've outlawed the purchase, the sale of these assault weapons. And it's up to individuals who own weapons today to come forward. They have to file a paper with the state police, as you know. That's not something that requires the intervention of a sheriff, for example. And I think that they're doing it as a matter of political grandstanding. They hope to delay long enough to have this run through the court system.
And even Attorney General Kwame Raoul shared his thoughts about sheriffs not wanting to enforce the law.
First of all, ditto. I, as Attorney General, I get to weigh into my legislators as to what our opinion is on pending legislation. Sheriffs have a sheriff's association. They have an opportunity to do the same. But once the legislature passes a legislation and the governor attaches his signature to it, it's the law of the land that they have the duty that they've sworn an oath to enforce. I will say also that as law enforcement agencies, there's overlap in jurisdiction as well. So if they don't do their jobs, there are other people available to do the job.
And Jasper County Sheriff Brandon Francis said that he wasn't concerned about the ramifications of not enforcing what he said was an unconstitutional law.
I don't have any fear from, not enforcing this. When I took my oath as sheriff, the second line in my oath was to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. I think we're all in agreement. There's several sheriffs that put out letters. In the majority of the state, I think it was around 90% of the sheriffs put out a statement stating that they would support the Constitution. So, obviously there's discretion in which laws that we enforce, but a law that would be a violation of our constitutional rights is something that we would not enforce. I mean, that's, we don't commonly see that, but in this case it's happened.
And I think a lot of sheriffs have sustained that position even now that the law is a year old. But after all of that, you had court cases that were filed in state and federal court. The first case was from Attorney Thomas Magg in state court, where he brought up arguments about the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. That was transferred to federal court, but there were other cases in federal court as well that were filed. Governor J.B. Pritzker reacting to that during the spring about what's exactly going on with all of these lawsuits. And here he is almost a year ago talking about all of those lawsuits that were filed.
No, it's just more of the same. These are folks who are in the super minority among the public, super minority in terms of elected officials, people who lost elections, who now seeing that they don't like policy that they couldn't win at the ballot box on, that they now hope that they can take to state court and win with a local judge. And so this obviously we're going to have to play all this out in state courts for the next several months, and there's a federal case as well that'll be carried out. But I think that they'll lose in the end. This is a constitutional law. It's been in effect in 8 other states. We're simply the 9th state to have passed and signed and put into law an assault weapons ban that will save lives.
One of the individual attorneys that filed lawsuits was Attorney Thomas DeVore, who secured thousands of temporary restraining orders from several different state courts. And ultimately that being appealed, and the appeals courts actually upheld those temporary restraining orders. Talked with DeVore back in the day on that issue.
Absent the record being fully vetted and generated, equal protection was by far the most pertinent argument in the short run. So the appellate court agreed with us and said that the TRO stands because there's been an equal protection violation. The equal protection argument is that this law carves out 7 categories of people based on their profession, that they're not bound by this law. They can buy all the AR-15s they want. They can buy all the 50 calibers they want. They can buy all of the 30-round magazines they want, purely based upon where they work. Current retired police, prison guards, county jailers, security people, and the government tried to argue that that was based upon their extensive training. That was the reason that they were able to be carved out. And there's a lot of problems with that, Greg.
So a lot of arguments about training, about equal protections. Talked with Maura Hirschauer briefly about the appeals court siding with the plaintiffs.
We've been expecting kind of any twist and turn that can come, so I feel really confident that we have passed the best bill we possibly can and that our attorneys are ready to fight it and still feeling positive. You know, I think I stand with my constituents who are tired of waking up every morning to hear about another mass shooting, whether it be in our state or in states across the country. We took a stand here in Illinois that our constituents wanted us to, and I'm proud of the work we did.
So the lawsuits continued to stack up, and you had even state-level lawsuits from Dan Calkins, state representative, and some of the arguments that he was bringing forward on that issue as well. Here's some of how that played out in state court with attorney Jerry Stocks arguing in Macon County.
Already in the state of Illinois, over 75% of the sheriffs say that they won't enforce it. We have county courts saying that they find it unconstitutional. We have a 5th District Appellate Court opinion declaring it unconstitutional on equal protection grounds. We have chaos right now, and we need to have an order that is clear that this application, that these orders already entered by the 5th District and in this proceeding makes it applicable in all applications.
And that argument ultimately leading to success in the Macon County courts. But Calkins said that getting a temporary restraining order was important. And then you get Calkins ultimately, fast forwarding, he secured final judgment in Macon County.
Well, today Judge Forbes issued us a ruling on my lawsuit, on our lawsuit. Perry Lewin and I and members of the Legal Gun Owners of Macon County, our association, and the judge granted all of us a temporary restraining order against this unconstitutional gun grab law.
And when they had that order come down, they were looking for some clarity on if that meant it was statewide or if it was just for Calkins and other plaintiffs. Calkins contended that it was statewide.
Last Friday, Judge Forbes issued a final judgment, and I'm going to use a couple of words here that are legal and lawyers are listening in and people want to know what's going on. You can ask an attorney. It was a Rule 18 order, a final judgment declaring the law unconstitutional. And in order to make a direct appeal to the Illinois Supreme Court under this Rule 302A1, the Attorney General has to agree that the law has been invalidated and it negates the very existence of the law and in all applications. And that is the essence of this appeal.
But Attorney General Kwame Raoul did not agree with that assessment. Through another reporter in Chicago, I had the question asked about what's the state's guidance on this.
Greg Bishop,
Fun.
what is the current guidance to ISP for enforcing the assault weapons ban?
That it is the law. That it is the law, except for with regards to the plaintiffs in the respective lawsuits.
So again, there was confusion there, even after a county court had final judgment on the law, but it was appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court. Calkins' case was after bypassing the appellate court, and you had then questions being brought up about conflicts of interest with 2 Illinois Supreme Court justice candidates in 2022 that ultimately got elected, and Governor J.B. Pritzker being somebody who provided a substantial amount of those campaign contributions, $1 million each, to Judge Rochford and O'Brien. And I asked the governor back in March about these political donations that he made.
And should they recuse themselves in 2 important
I am sure this is something that the right wing is trying to stir up. I know you've written about it. The fact of the matter is I supported candidates who are running all across the board. If you're suggesting that the fact that I gave money to, let's say, the Democratic Party or to the committees that supported candidates means that everybody who received any money has to recuse themselves from anything to do with the state of Illinois, that's ridiculous. And I've certainly never asked anybody to vote a certain way or decide on a case a certain way. I would never do that. I never have. I never will. And these are independent judges, and they didn't go around and campaign on things, you know, that they thought would win my support for them. I believe in them. I supported them like lots of other people did.
So again, the governor saying that it was ridiculous to assume that he was trying to compromise somebody's position. And I asked Dan Calkins about that question back in April.
Says it's ridiculous to think that Supreme Court justices who gave $1 million to each should recuse themselves. Says it's a right-wing talking point. Representative Calkins, I don't know if you want to speak to that as a plaintiff in this case, but should these two Supreme Court justices recuse themselves?
That's up to them. We're not asking for that. We're not pursuing that. That's not an issue. Our issue is that this is an unconstitutional law. Our process goes to the Illinois Supreme Court, where we expect to get a fair hearing and defend our judgment, and we're not concerned about that.
But ultimately, Calkins was concerned about that, and his attorneys filing recusal motions that were ultimately denied by those two Illinois Supreme Court justices. And this is a concern even outside of the state, judicial integrity. I talked with Chris Forsyth out of an organization out of Colorado, and he shared some of his thoughts about the importance of judicial integrity when it comes to political contributions and how those are treated when they are hearing cases that may involve people who gave them money.
Oh, judicial integrity is imperative for our American democracy. The judicial branch is, and we want it to be fair and honest, and to have integrity, so we can have confidence in the opinions that the judicial branch, that the judicial branch issues. If we don't have confidence in the opinions the judicial branch issues, then our judicial branch is failing.
And he goes on to talk about what are some of the things that could lead to questions around if a judge has integrity.
With judicial integrity. Sure, political donations can lead to issues of judicial integrity, and the United States Supreme Court has said so. In some cases, they have found political donations to be so great that there's a conflict of interest that's impermissible. In other words, the lowest standard for judges is really in the United States Constitution. That's where whether a fair and impartial trial was had. And the Supreme Court has found a situation where, somebody gave so much money to a judge that just, made the ultimate opinion that the judge issued in the case involving that donor invalid.
So again, Chris Forsyth sharing the concerns there are about judicial integrity for these types of things. And even more, the governor was asked about the campaign contributions, and the question another reporter asked was, what was he looking to get from those sizable campaign contributions?
Well, my hope is that good people get elected to public office. That's why I think you would contribute, or anybody else in this room would contribute to somebody. I would also point out that unlike what some people are putting forward among the right wing, the truth of the matter is that my name is on these suits because I am an official representative of the state of Illinois. When I became governor, there were suits that were outstanding, and Rauner's name was removed from those suits, and my name was put on them. It had nothing to do with me specifically, just the fact that I happened to be governor at that time and this time. So the conflicts that have been alleged are just, false. And I'm must say that I think people who run for judge do it for the right reasons. And I think that people who give to candidates for judge do it for the right reasons. And judges ultimately are required to make their independent decisions about the cases. And I think that's what judges that any of us support should do and I hope will do.
And we are doing a live-to-tape documentary a year in for Illinois' Protect Illinois Communities Act, the ban on 170-plus semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, handguns, magazines over certain capacities, a gun registration with the deadline of January 1st. It's Bishop on Air. Thanks for hanging out. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell as we are live each and every weekday morning. And this is just like a rough draft of sorts as I continue to compile all of this information. We'll have a, surely once we get some finality, when that'll be, who knows, but we'll do a deeper, more produced documentary. But on the 1 year anniversary, I wanted to be sure that we kind of reflected back to where we've come from. But fast forward to March of last year, you had Illinois Gun Owner Lobby Day with the Illinois State Rifle Association. Governor J.B. Pritzker being asked about the thousands of people who arrived in Springfield to lobby for their Second Amendment rights.
Well, let's start with just everybody's voice should be heard. If people want to gather and make their point, this is obviously the city to do it in, with the legislators here in session. So we welcome everybody, all views. We also, of course, are here, 3 days after this terrible shooting in Nashville. We all grieve, I think, for the 3 adults and 3 very young children who died that day, but also deeply concerned about the kinds of weapons that were used in that attack. One person with a couple of assault-style weapons and other weapons on her, and we pray that'll never happen in the state of Illinois, and certainly an assault weapons ban will help us to limit the possibility of that ever occurring.
So what message do you have for what could be potentially thousands of Illinoisans marching down the street?
Again, we welcome their voices. We can all have disagreements on important issues, but their voices should be heard.
So the voices were heard. They met at a convention center in Springfield. Illinois State Rifle Association's Richard Pearson leading some of that conversation.
This case that we're looking at will change not only Illinois, but every state in the union. It eats time, it eats money, and that's what the state wants, because the state has the ability to use my money to fight me. I have to use my money and your money to fight them. So they use our money against us. But that doesn't mean we're going away. That doesn't mean we're going to give up. We are going to fight on no matter what. So we have a battery of other cases. We are going to batter them with lawsuits, and we're going to keep them busy constantly.
And indeed, those lawsuits continue to stack up. As with iGold each and every year, you've got people marching through the streets of Springfield with their voices being heard. iGold this year, by the way, go check out the Illinois State Rifle Association's website and get details on when that is. I believe it's coming up in April, but I might be corrected on that. More from a rally outside the Capitol in March last year.
We need you. We have to sit across the aisle having these bad bills shoved down our throats. We need you today. We need you every single day. If you're from an area that your legislator is not proud to be up here, tell them that you need them to be up here and stand up for you. Again, not just today, every day of the year, because that's what it's going to take. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, Chapin Rose, 51st Senate District, Lawrence County to Vermilion County, straight up the Indiana line. Welcome to Springfield, everybody. Thank you for supporting our Second Amendment. I want to say one thing that Chris Miller picked up on. You don't need a law to protect you in your own home. God gave us the right to protect us in our own home. This is from on high. It doesn't come from a politician. It doesn't come from anybody in this building. It sure as hell doesn't come from J.B. Pritzker. Each one of us has a right to defend ourselves, our families, and our homes. End of story. That's why it's in the Constitution of the United States.
So the obvious mantra has been all along that those who oppose this see it as a infringement of the Constitution. So that all aside, you've got in April a judge ultimately granting a preliminary injunction in a federal case, and that was after a hearing, I believe, in April. Here's Todd Vandermeide following that hearing in the Southern District of Illinois, talking about how he felt that the case was going to go.
Well, we've seen reductions in 60% or more in some stores as far as what their availability to sell, because it's not just the firearms. It's the components, it's magazines, it's stocks, it's parts. This bill, this law does not allow me to repair a firearm if I don't already have the parts in my house. I cannot buy a detent spring. I cannot buy a barrel to replace a shot-out barrel or any of those other components within this. They refuse to acknowledge how far and broad their ban goes. Because I'd even contend that based under Section 24.1.10 of the magazine ban, the 870 shotgun is illegal for sale in the state of Illinois under their magazine ban.
And Vandermeide felt that after the judge, Stephen McGlynn, heard the case on a preliminary basis, he would grant that injunction. Here's Thomas Magg talking about that after April of 2023, where Judge McGlynn ultimately heard the case.
Judge McGlynn had obviously read all the briefs. He was obviously familiar with the topic. I did not think much of the state's argument. The state's argument simply seemed to boil down to that the legislature can do what they want. They seem to ignore the Bruin case out of the Supreme Court. I'm optimistic that in the coming days or weeks, Judge McGlynn will enter the TRO that we've all requested. The weak point in the defendant's arguments boils down to that they're arguing that the legislature is not bound by the Constitution. That's the exact opposite of how it really works. The Constitution controls what the legislature does. The legislature doesn't get to control what the Constitution does.
And after that hearing, a few weeks go by, and Judge McGlynn issuing that preliminary injunction, just a preliminary motion, not the merits of the case, which halted the law from being enforced for 6 days before the state appealed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and had a stay put on that injunction, essentially saying that injunction's not in place. So that was an interesting series of events there. But while that federal case continued to play out in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals last spring, you had Calkins bring his case to the Illinois Supreme Court, where those arguments were made, with the state making their defense.
The Circuit Court held that the assault weapons and large capacity magazine restrictions in the Protect Illinois Communities Act violated the equal protection and special legislation clauses of the Illinois Constitution. Those are the claims that are at issue here. Claim present an equal protection violation, and the plaintiffs are not similarly situated to either. With respect to those in the grandfather provision who already had assault weapons and large capacity magazines, the plaintiffs are not similarly situated to them, to the extent that they don't already have assault weapons, because they don't have that reliance interest that people who already had assault weapons and large capacity magazines do. With respect to the 7 enumerated professions in the law, the members of the general public are not similarly situated to those in those professions because members of those professions are sort of presumed to exercise greater responsibility in the safe handling and storage of firearms.
So a lot of the arguments surrounded the idea of equal protections and whether or not certain classes of individuals could be carved out while others aren't. And you had Jerry Stocks, the attorney for Dan Calkins, in the Illinois Supreme Court make his case.
Protection and special legislation overlap. Say they're not coterminous because of the applicability of can we write a general law would be the additional element to a special legislation challenge. But every fact that is in the equal protection cause of action, every last one of those facts is included in the special legislation. And the word additional is not replace everything I already have stated. It is saying that we have additional rights that are implicated by this statutory scheme that not only invades the right to possess firearms in the home, which is undisputedly a protected right, but it is reaching broader to create how we can do non-commercial transfer, inheritance even, It is permeating a whole range of transactions.
Statute. There are 7 categories of exempted individuals, all of whom must undergo training to maintain their exempt status. And the plaintiff, in this case, the plaintiffs, you're saying, well, they have FOID cards, correct?
They have the right to bear arms for self-defense in the home. The FOID card doesn't give them that right. The FOID card is just a mechanism by which the state can assure that they're not otherwise disqualified. We do not advocate, nor do we believe that the Second Amendment tolerates in any manner these prohibitions of assault weapons based on the mere fortuity of when you may acquire them. But setting that aside, if everyone would have to regulate their firearm because of the purpose that we want to keep track of where those arms are, equal protection requires that that fundamental individual right be applied to all citizens the same, because it is an individual right.
And so again, that's Jerry Stocks from the Illinois Supreme Court, and afterwards I was able to take part in a press gaggle with the Illinois Attorney General, who sounded off on his thoughts of how the hearing went and the direction that they're going, and ultimately the priorities that those who support the law have.
And do you want more people to go out and get those weapons and go to parades and commit mass shootings? I don't. And I don't think the legislature does either. During the course of this case, making its way through the system, there have been use of such weapons in multiple cases, almost every week or every other week. And I think there's a rational basis to stop the proliferation of these types of weapons in the hands of people that'll do mass damage, take many lives in a matter of seconds.
Back to the question of training, can I not get the same type of training that law enforcement can get, or security or wardens can get? Can I
Well, you play a different role, right? It's not just a question of training. You're not in a law enforcement role, I don't think.
So the question of training, the Attorney General reacting to, I got Stocks' reaction to the AG.
Why can't I just go get the same training that a law enforcement officer has and pay for it out of pocket or whatever? His response was that, from his understanding, I'm not law enforcement, or other people that are impacted by this are not law enforcement.
It's privilege and benefit. That's special legislation violation. But in the concealed carry, ultimately, they had to accord an opportunity for training. And there's a lot of principles that I fear get conflated because everybody views the issue through the prism of their desired outcome. So then you start twisting the principles and the analytics, you don't work through it. And so it's the problem. Cases that are charged, such as this, it just comes with it.
And Stocks also, even though 2 of the Illinois Supreme Court justices denied recusing themselves from the case, back in May, after the Illinois Supreme Court heard the case, he said that the recusal motion, he still stands by it, and was looking at possible action moving forward.
I remain and stand behind the issues raised in that motion because I submit that it is the prudent course for our judiciary to be highly guarded on those issues. And I recognize that they got to be careful not to disqualify themselves out of every case. I mean, it's a tough call. And Illinois politics makes it really tough on judges because they have to be elected in this state. So I recognize those issues, but my personal view as a downstater is it's pretty darn corrupt in Illinois, and I know our perception downstate is that we want to see that the process and the institutions, not aspersions on the individuals, but that the institutions and our procedures do more to protect against that.
And again, flash forward, the Illinois Supreme Court in August ultimately siding with the state and saying that Calkins didn't prove his case. And Calkins then said that he was going to be eyeballing possibly taking the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, which he did. They sent a conference, and this week the U.S. Supreme Court denying Calkins' request that they hear the case. But back in August, Governor J.B. Pritzker took part in a fireside chat about gun control, and here's a clip of him talking about his thoughts on the odds of a legal challenge succeeding to knock the law down, or whether or not the law will stand.
You know, I don't know what percentage chance to put on it, but it is not zero chance, and it is not, 30% chance. I think it's better than that we will win. I don't know what percent to put on it. I just think that we have a pretty good argument, and it's demonstrated by the quality of the bill that got passed and signed here in Illinois, and the commentary of the appellate court judges. We can't allow people to have shoulder-fired missiles. There's some limit to what we can allow people to have, and they're going to have to recognize that it shouldn't be a popularity.
And based on that, I asked the governor before the Illinois Supreme Court ruled about why he would sign a law. He said he felt had about a 1 in 3 chance of succeeding in the challenge of the federal or state courts. Here's the governor back in August.
Why sign the law if you had, if you know that it's a little bit better than 30% chance of survival?
I don't think that's exactly what I said. I was trying to articulate, though, that you just don't know what's going to happen in the federal courts, and that as of late, the appointees to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, are people who unfortunately want to take away the rights of parade goers and people who live in our neighborhoods to live safely and to not have assault weapons that are attacking their local communities. So I want to be clear. I don't know what the outcomes are going to be in court cases until they come out. I did not know until you just mentioned it that the Illinois Supreme Court is going to come out with their decision tomorrow. I'm hopeful, but no idea how they'll resolve it. It does matter what happens at the state level and state court, but ultimately the Supreme Court likely will be ruling on this, and so whatever happens there will ultimately, I hate to use the word trump, whatever happens in our state courts.
So again, the governor being asked about these things in August before the Illinois Supreme Court ultimately ruled, which they did. They sided with the state against Calkins, but the questions of what happens next after the U.S. Supreme Court denied Calkins' case is interesting. This while a state-level case from Tom DeVore, while the Illinois Supreme Court ruled against Calkins, the lower court vacated the DeVore cases. Well, DeVore's back in court trying to get those cases reinstated. So we'll see what ultimately happens there as lawsuits persist in all of this. But also questions about the rules, because when a law is passed, the administration has to set up rules to essentially govern and execute those laws. While the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, a legislative body looking at these things, had some questions about all of this. Here's Ryan Spain during a recent JCAR hearing, urging the state police to do more to inform the public.
We've had discussions with the state police, representatives of whom are here today in the room with us. They understand the very lengthy, detailed questions, areas of ambiguity that we're looking for resolution. And the state police have agreed to respond to questions that will be generated and facilitated to them through this committee, and have agreed to also hold additional public hearings for the permanent rulemaking associated with this topic. And so we have a lot of discussion that will continue to take place. JCAR will be meeting again in Springfield in November, early November during the second week of veto session, and then again here in Chicago in December. So expect a lot of continued discussion on this topic and an ability to provide further clarification to questions, whether they're specific firearm attachment, magazine questions, issues about private security contractors.
And the questions continued on, and Jay Carr ultimately telling the Illinois State Police to have these hearings. But more from the rules, you have Dan Eldridge, Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois, raising questions about those rules and how they were applied.
Published the rules. The state police published their rules especially around the registry on September the 18th. And so we had a very limited time to respond. The dealer organization, FFLIL, did file a response before the deadline with the state police requesting 3 hearings, one in Northern Illinois outside of Chicago, one in Central Illinois, and one in Southern Illinois. Our thinking being that it's really quite burdensome for people throughout the state to have to travel to Chicago or travel to Springfield for a public hearing. What we got out of Jay Carr today was it is what it is. We're glad that the call for hearings was heard, and I think the public hearings should be very informative for the state police with respect to the rules that they published.
And those public hearings transpiring with a lot of questions and few answers, and even those who attended in person having trouble hearing at one particular hearing. Eldridge talks about the impact on gun dealers.
Our members have seen business decline anywhere between 10 and 50 or 60% versus last year. This is a very seasonal business, so the right way to measure it is, how was my September versus last September, and how much of that is the ban on sales of centerfire magazine-fed rifles and other items, and how much of it is macroeconomic headwinds and higher interest rates and less discretionary spending is hard to say, but it's certainly not helpful. And as in commerce, it's not helpful. In people's ability to defend themselves, it's not helpful. And hopefully the people that are sitting in judgment on this will look at current events and understand the importance of an armed citizenry, of a prepared citizenry in terms of self-defense on an individual and on a community level, and get back to the sensible nature of people having the best tools possible with which to defend themselves.
So again, the ongoing debate about the state's gun and magazine ban, even spilling into some of these hearings. Here is the hearing that happened in Springfield with State Representative Brad Halbrook asking questions of Illinois State Police.
I want to be clear that we know this public hearing is taking place because the governor and his radical left agenda. He and his Democrat legislators passed this bill and then laid it at your feet to have to deal with it. I support law enforcement unapologetically, and we know this is not your fault. However, there are questions that need to be answered.
And the questions he had ranged from enforcement of this
measure. So here's the questions I have for you today. What happens when hundreds of thousands of gun owners are non-compliant overnight and they're just otherwise totally law-abiding citizens? What is going to be their punishment for non-compliance?
Sir, my intent is to take down your questions and provide.
Okay. I mean, I can submit these later in writing so that we don't. I mean, I'm looking for a response.
Okay, so my initial response would be that we will turn to the bill, and I believe the bill sets forth penalties for failure to file your endorsement affidavit, and so it will be up to each individual state's attorney in the 102 counties to decide how they will enforce that.
So again, up to the state's attorneys and how they're going to enforce this. And we heard earlier how state's attorneys and sheriffs across the state have said that they're not going to enforce this. Continuing on with a live-to-tape documentary here on the one-year anniversary of the Protecting Illinois Communities Act, the state's gun and magazine ban being signed. Then you had Halbrook during a public hearing in Springfield late last year ask questions about enforcement of this and subsequent
events. And then the next step is what? Let's go through the progression.
The first offense is a Class A. Second and subsequences are Class 3 felonies.
So again, the question is, what is the definition of first offense and subsequent offenses after that?
Okay, again, that's going to be up to the state's attorney and the courts, but typically that would mean that you have to have a conviction for the first offense before it would move on to a second offense. Okay.
And there were a lot of other questions. Josh Rotowski with the Outdoor Sports Organization questioned the issue of airsoft guns.
Are you familiar with airsoft?
Yes, I am.
Small plastic pellet firearms. They use the same attachment points that modern sporting rifles use. So if an individual only possesses airsoft rifles and has a forward grip for their airsoft rifle, Do they have to register that forward grip as an assault weapons attachment? Because it could be attached as a second grip onto a modern sporting rifle.
It would not be our understanding that it needs to be endorsed. However, that is an issue for all 102 counties to decide how they will enforce, and I cannot tell you how they will or won't enforce that.
So a lot of the questions were meant to craft the updated rules that JCAR had to consider, and they did indeed file second notice rules, but those rules have not been implemented. And the January 1st deadline to register has come and gone, with those overarching questions about what needs to be registered still looming. And then there was a third hearing down in, was it Caseyville, that included proponents talking about their support of the Protecting Illinois Communities Act. And here's some of how that played out with a much larger crowd in that Southern Illinois hearing with Illinois State Police, and hearing public comments that were provided in written form.
Moms Demand Action is a grassroots movement of Americans fighting for public safety measures that can protect people from gun violence. We work to pass stronger gun laws and to close the loopholes that jeopardize the safety of our families. The Metro East group of the Illinois Moms Demand chapter encompasses East St. Louis and areas to the northeast in the metro area.
Law enforcement agencies, including the ISP, are charged with enforcing the Protect Illinois Communities Act throughout the state. ISP will continue to enforce the FOID Act and Article 24 of the Criminal Code of 2012 by partnering with local law enforcement through our Violent Crimes Intelligence Task Force. The task force is a collaborative effort to reduce and prevent illegal possession and use of firearms, firearm-related homicides, and other violent crimes.
So state police sharing more about all of that, and they heard from the likes of Valinda Rowe. They heard from Ed Sullivan. They even heard from former state senator Darren Bailey about his concerns of all of this and how he really isn't interested in complying with this, but also calling out Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly.
I have utmost respect for the Illinois State Police, and I am so sorry for this tough situation that you are in. I am curious of one thing, probably the only question I have. This is home territory to Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly. Is there a reason why he is not here today to face his friends and neighbors?
Director Kelly is otherwise occupied within the state, and he said...
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You can tell our governor, who is comfortably residing in his gated mansion with private security, that if he wants our firearms, he is going to have to pry them from my cold, dead hands. This is America. Our founding fathers understood the importance of an armed citizenry as a safeguard against tyranny. We will uphold that legacy with unwavering determination. Thank you.
So again, Darren Bailey there making his thoughts heard, but you had others who, after the committee hearing, they took time to chat with members of the media, and that included Illinois State Rifle Association's Ed Sullivan, who had this to say.
No, I know exactly what happens. For the first offense, I get a misdemeanor. For the second offense, I get a felony. It won't happen to me because I will not have a firearm in this state. I'm going to comply with the law. I'm just not going to register the firearm. Okay, but what about folks that don't have the ability to move their firearms out of state? I mean, think about the cost that some of the people that they just can't pay for it. I mean, this is a completely regressive law against anybody that doesn't have the means. I happen to have the means, and I live right on the border, so I can move them to a storage unit across the way.
So Sullivan saying that he was going to move his firearms. Of course, that January 1st deadline having come and gone, but those rules still very much up in the air as to how it's going to be enforced. Here are a Republican and a Democrat representative of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules talking about the rules process even after those 3 public hearings.
We continue to work with the Illinois State Police. They've promulgated emergency rules regarding the registration of certain firearms. They just finished having their public hearings. They had 3 throughout the state. So now it's time to collect all of the feedback, which was very, very extensive, and they've committed to reporting back, answering those very meaningful questions for citizens, for responsible firearm owners throughout the state, and addressing changes that should be made at our December JCAR meeting. Yeah, we need to move quickly, though. We need to understand what changes are happening because there is January 1st requirement. So I think it would be better to see some adjustments from the state police in December rather than waiting for after a deadline is passed and then understanding what changes might be made for permanent rules. Yeah, I think there are a number of unresolved issues, so I look forward to seeing if they come any closer to resolution. I think ultimately we're waiting for some action on this now at the Supreme Court level. The Supreme Court of the United States is going to need to weigh in on these issues, and I expect that they will at some time. But you raise a lot of very fair questions. For in the meantime, what does this mean for law-abiding firearm owners in the state of Illinois who continue to raise a lot of legitimate questions to the state police about their requirements and responsibilities?
But should there be a vote to suspend?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I called for a vote to issue a formal objection, which resulted in a tie during our October meeting.
I don't want to guess about what sort of action the department will take at any subsequent meeting. I will say that the state police have done a good job of reaching out for public input. That's what we've asked them to do. They held 3 community hearings to take input. That's not something they had to do, but we requested they do that. They have. And I think they have a very difficult job in front of them right now, and I think they're doing it well. I don't know what sort of, off the top of my head, I don't know what the calendar looks like, what sort of statutory deadlines we're dealing with. So because of that, I don't want to speculate in it. I just don't know what the time frame is without checking with staff. I wouldn't want to speculate. You know, we have a saying that every law is constitutional until a court tells you it's not. So the state police has to go along with the rulemaking as contemplated by the law.
With this emergency rule in place, though, for 150 days from late September,
Mhm.
it puts, the question way past January 1st. With these emergency rules in place and the question possibly in front of the Supreme Court, isn't it judicious to suspend the rules until a date out?
I think, as I said, we have to assume that the law is constitutional until a court tells us it's not.
Again, that's State Senator Bill Cunningham. Before that, State Representative Ryan Spain, the Republican, Cunningham, the Democrat, co-chairs of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. They meet next week, and it's possible they could bring up the second notice rules that were filed about the state gun and magazine ban. But again, here we are. It's going to be, 2 weeks after the January 1st deadline. And the registration numbers in the 3-month window remained below 1% until that final week, where it jumped up to 1.22% of the state's firearm owner identification card holders that registered firearms. And back in November, Governor J.B. Pritzker and State Representative Bob Morgan reacted to those low registration numbers. Here's the governor reacting to that.
So I hate that mainstream media are picking up right-wing media talking points, so let me correct you a little bit. Yeah, there are 2.4 million FOID card holders in the state of Illinois. 2.4 million people do not have assault weapons. So when you talk about the percentage of people who are filing and registering, it's a much higher percentage than what you've cited of the people who are required to do so. I can tell you, at least for me, that I think all of us take our time sometimes when we know the deadline is 2.5 months hence, that we'll find the time eventually to go online, which is what they need to do, and to register as they're required to do. So for freedom, we're simply recognizing that we want people to be safe and don't think that it's a weapon that keeps you safe to have something that fires that many bullets in that short a period of time. I don't know if Representative Morgan wants to address it as well.
I would echo everything the governor just mentioned. This is new for the state of Illinois. As you noted, historically, we've registered people with our FOID card registration, this is the first time we're registering weapons themselves. I also think there are a lot of individuals who have these weapons are considering whether to sell them to someone out of state, which is a provision in the law that they're allowed to do. So I do think this is a function of cramming for the test, that people will wait till the last minute. They'll see there's obviously, we're still waiting for a ruling from the Federal Court of Appeals. Some people are waiting for that, but I also expect that number to increase as people recognize that they want to be law-abiding citizens and they want to be consistent with state law, and they will register their existing legacy weapons. Otherwise, they're risking their FOID card. And I think the vast majority of people are just committed to being law-abiding citizens the way they are now.
And the appeals court did ultimately side with the state on that, but that was on a preliminary injunction, not on the merits. The merits of the case still very much alive. Governor J.B. Pritzker last month being asked about continued confusion with the rules not being in place. Here's what he had to say at the governor's mansion.
How can you enforce a law where there's confusion of the rules, though? You've got this possibly leading to a Class 3 felony. People would lose their rights.
Well, that's an exaggeration that often occurs in right-wing media. The reality is that most people really do understand these rules. And by the way, people are actually signing up, registering their automatic assault weapons, their high-capacity magazines, rather. And as we get closer to it, we're seeing more and more people actually do what they're required to do under the law.
But I also asked the governor about why there needs to be a gun ban registration.
Why have a registry of these firearms?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand, because what you want to do is prevent people from purchasing assault weapons in the state, and you want to make sure that you know where those very, very deadly weapons are, who owns them, when and if a crime is committed with one of them.
But even after the law was ultimately upheld on preliminary motions, you had sheriffs and state's attorneys across the state say that they're not going to enforce this. I talked with Kankakee County Sheriff Mike Downey weeks ago, and here's what he had to say.
Where I individually stand is if you are a lawful gun owner, and there are people out there who are really opposed to the FOID system, the card. But if you are a lawful gun owner and have a FOID, and you utilize that gun for your self-protection or hunting or whatever you use that for, and it's lawful, the sheriff's office really shouldn't, be too concerned about it, because that's, what people use to protect themselves. And, we are not going to go out and actively go to people who we think might have a gun, because if we were to go to somebody's house, we technically would have to have a warrant.
I also talked with Richard Pearson, the Illinois State Rifle Association Executive Director, before January 1st.
Exactly. People aren't going to register their firearms. They don't trust the government. They know, as happened in Connecticut, they had a similar law 2 years ago, and now the governor's calling for confiscation of those firearms because now they know who has them and where they are. And not only that, people paid the government to have their guns confiscated, because it costs a $25 registration fee. So you're paying the government to spy on you. And people don't like that. And the number of gun owners in this country has never been higher. People are rebelling against this. And so I look forward to the Supreme Court overruling the Pike Act.
So ISRA says they're planning to take their case to the U.S. Supreme Court. You have the Beavis case looking to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So all of those things still very much active. But on January 1st, you had former state Senator Darren Bailey share a video saying that he is not going to comply with this. And he says that he did not register any firearms when I chatted with him.
Our founding fathers' original intent, they guaranteed, they assured, they understood what inalienable rights are. And those are rights that are given to we the people, individuals, by God. And actually, it is up to the government to protect those rights.
So there you have it, a look back at the past year of the States Protecting Illinois Communities Act with a live-to-tape documentary. Appreciate you guys checking this out. And, of course, I am way past my time here. So that's all we've got with Bishop on Air. Greatly appreciate you guys taking the time with us. And stay tuned. We've got many more things coming up each and every weekday morning here with Bishop on Air. All right, again, guys, thank you so much for hanging out. That's all I've got for you today. And of course, that was a live to tape documentary. Just to kind of look back at the past year, I'll compile all of these things as I look to put together a more thorough and complete documentary that's produced. And we'll see what ultimately transpires with all the court cases. Because you've got cases that I saw that Highland Park, apparently a judge dismissed that case. You had the Beavis case that's looking to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, the ISRA case that's looking to go to the Supreme Court. You've got in the Southern District of Illinois this week, Judge McGlynn telling the litigants to be prepared as to who they're going to have as witnesses or experts testify during the evidentiary hearings in the challenge against the state's law on Fifth Amendment grounds. So plenty of things going on. Guys, I appreciate you taking the time with me each and every weekday morning and making the show what it is. If you support what's going on, you can, of course, buy some merchandise below or just share this with your friends. And we'll see you tomorrow here about 7:30, 7:45-ish or so. And we'll be back at it, all right? Have yourselves a great day.
Let me cover it.